You're listening to 94.4 FM Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show.
You're listening to Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from the local area and around the world. And the aim of the show is to increase awareness of different sports and also increase participation. And we're very fortunate in this show to have interviewed some of the world's best athletes, sports people, coaches, trainers, sports psychologists, different people across all different professions related to sport. We also have a segment where we talk to people in the field of psychology, some of the leading people in the field of psychology, mental health and related fields, give us insight into their research and their perspectives on the field of psychology and related fields. Today we have a very interesting guest who's going to sort of give us an idea into what it involves to be performance. He's the performance manager of British Diving, and I'm sure he'll give us a really fascinating insight into what it takes to perform and other things related to performance. So, Kim White, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Hi, Jim. Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you on board, Kim. So, if we can sort of start him from the beginning, how you got involved in working as a performance manager, if you could sort of share with our listeners sort of how you actually got involved working in performance.
Yeah, sure. Well, when I first started coaching diving 40 years ago, there were no professional diving coaches in the UK. I got headhunted to go abroad for 2 Olympics, so I worked abroad for 5 years, and returned in the late 90s, just when UK sport were being established, and was fortunate enough to write the plans that initially got the funding for diving. Now, most diving coaches are professional, especially the ones that work for British Diving. Mm-hmm. But there's still a few voluntary coaches at smaller clubs that are key to our success as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting in terms of, for our listeners, Kim, sort of what you do. What does a performance manager do? Just, I know obviously this, no doubt, we'd probably struggle to fit into one show, but just a general overview. What does a performance manager do? What general role do you do as a performance manager?
Sure. Okay. Well, I work as part of a team, and we enable athletes to win medals on the world stage, which is ultimately the World Championships and the Olympic Games. We create a development program of support around the divers and for the coaches to help them basically be the best that they can be. We surround them with things like sports science, sports medicine. For examples, that's like physio treatment, soft tissue massage, sports psychology, nutrition. We also facilitate their travel opportunities to international competitions to gain international exposure, and also to help increase their mental toughness, which will eventually help them win the medals.
Absolutely. And in terms of yourself, you mentioned like when you first got involved in your role, and what would you say that the changes have been over the years in diving, Kim? How things sort of evolved from when you first...
Sure. Well, thanks to the funding of UK sport, it enabled people, in the first case, it enabled the athletes to be able to focus full-time on their training and not have to have a part-time job or whatever. And secondly, it enabled the coaches to do the same thing. So originally, when I was a young diving coach, I had a full-time job and coached early mornings, lunchtimes and evenings whenever I could. But fortunately, with the lottery funding, our coaches and athletes don't have to do that now. They have dedicated specific high-performance time at elite national training centres. And that's one of the reasons why we're as good as we are now.
Yeah, and that's really interesting you say, and obviously the British public are very keen on their sport, and certainly when the Olympics come around, the public get behind the team and enjoy watching the performances. And I mean, how in terms of funding, I can appreciate it's sort of crucial in terms of winning medals. The athletes have to be able to be full-time. Obviously, a lot of countries around the world, things have changed in terms of sport, but how important is it to train full-time to be able to compete on the world stage, Kim?
It's the most important thing there is, because all the other countries in the world that we're competing against do exactly the same. I think Australia started the Australian Institute of Sport, which is a bit like our English Institute of Sport and UK Sports, years before we did, so we were well behind the eight ball when we started wanting to be better. And the Chinese, all the communist countries like China, Russia, they've always been full-time. There's never ever been anyone involved in sport like that that's voluntary. Whereas years ago we were all voluntary. Now we're full-time, either program managers, coaches, or athletes.
No, definitely. And it's interesting you say. I mean, Australia started Institute of Sport after a poor showing in the 70s, and they decided to do something about it, address that. Obviously, hosting the Olympics in 2000 was a big boost too in terms of moving forward. But I sort of get the sense that after Atlanta, GB sort of recognised that sport was really important to the general public and did something about it too. Was that, do you think, a turning point for sport?
Yeah. Most definitely. Atlanta Games, I could be wrong, but I think we only got one gold medal. And that's was the reason that lottery funding started.
Definitely. And do you sense that from your position how important it is to the public that the sort of success carries on, Kim? Is it something that you sense that is key to the public?
Again, most definitely. I know that UK Sport have done surveys with all the general public, and I think it's something like 90% want us to continue getting medals on the world stage. And I saw that on a TV interview recently. So, I mean, there's so many different things that go into diving. I mean, you see a diver dive in the pool, but that's only like less than 50% of their training program. The other 50% of the time they're doing gymnastics or acrobatics or ballet, different sports that help them create the speed that they need, the strength and flexibility, and most importantly, to look aesthetically pleasing and graceful.
Absolutely, I can imagine that it's a sport mentally as well, where you've got to be really focused. You've got that sort of split second decision.
That mental toughness is one of the keys. You've really got to be strong-minded. And if you watch some of the athletes before they dive, one of our best ones puts a chamois over his eyes, and you can see him doing the mental imagery and seeing himself doing the dive to perfection.
Wow, that's amazing. And obviously, being full-time, they're the sort of things you can work on, where if you're sort of part-time, then whether you've got a job or whether you sort of got other things on your mind, it's sort of hard to focus on these areas, these sort of...
Exactly, especially, one of our biggest challenges is obviously the Chinese. Diving is their national sport. And they've got hundreds of national centralised training centres around China. I mean, China's a big place, but their centralised training that starts with the children at the age of 6. And they're there full time. They live there, they eat, they sleep there, they go to school there, and their parents get money for it, so they have a better way of life as well. Absolutely.
So it's an opportunity for them to sort of, I would imagine, for some of them also to if they're in poverty as well, to maybe, get out of that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you know what? Sometimes success brings its own challenges as well. You've got, after Rio, we lost 3 of our Olympic coaches because they were headhunted by other countries. So keeping our coaches, best coaches in this country, is also another challenge.
Wow, yeah, I can imagine. Definitely. And in terms of the highlights, what would you say some of your highlights have been in the time you've been sort of working as a performance manager?
Sure. Well, Athens 2004 Olympic Games was the first diving medal we had for 44 years. And that was Leon and Pete winning a silver. So to be there and see that, and that was the first real Olympics after lottery funding had settled down. So that showed that we were able to do it. But those athletes were a little bit older in age, so they were sort of on their way out of retirement. So we had to start with a new batch. And obviously the next Olympic medal that we got was London 2012 with Tom Daly's bronze when he was still only a junior. Our last Olympics, which doesn't seem that long ago, but it's 5 years ago now in Rio, was the first diving gold medal that we'd ever had in the history of our sport, with Jack Law and Chris Mears. And obviously anyone that watched the Olympics last week would have seen our second gold medal with Tom and Matty in Tokyo, proving that diving can keep producing at this level.
Absolutely. And is that sort of when you do have success like that, Kim, does that inspire, you think, like a generation? People sort of see, the Tom Daly's of this world and think, okay, there is an opportunity to sort of go into that sport. Do you sort of feel that's an opportunity to inspire a generation of people to have a go at diving?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I don't think diving will ever be a household sport, but it has become very popular thanks to people like Tom Daly and Jack Law and Chris Mears, Leon Taylor, Peter Waterfield. I'm actually pleasantly surprised when I just meet a complete stranger and tell them I'm involved in diving, and they say, "Oh, do you know so-and-so?" And they know a lot of the best athletes that we have in diving because they've won Olympic medals.
Absolutely. And in terms of like challenges that you've faced over the years, Kim, are you okay to sort of share some of the challenges that have presented themselves to you in your role?
Yeah, well, obviously, as I alluded to earlier, the Chinese are our biggest challenge because it's their national sport. And so if they're guaranteed to win almost every Olympic medal apart from one or two, and they're the ones, the gold, and they're the ones that we're targeting. The other thing I said was about keeping the best coaches in, no access to diving whatsoever. And what made it worse was that the athletes and coaches were seeing by video and Zoom other countries still able to train. Like the Chinese didn't have any lockdown. They had it pretty bad, but they just stayed in their national centre.
Yes.
And watching them training in Australia and in Europe, we were one of the last countries to come back to training.
Yes.
So that's a huge challenge to keep fit during those 6 summer months of not being able to access a pool. So everyone was doing their dry land skills in their gardens and as best they could keep them fit.
Yeah, and is that sort of like in your role? Is that something you sort of thought about, Kim, and sort of thought in terms of how to adapt to the situation to the best of your ability to make sure?
Sure.
Yeah.
We were so impressed by some of the videos that the athletes were sending us because it was almost a government sport instruction. You weren't allowed to coach by video in case there was an accident. So we got the athletes to set up videos in their gardens. Fortunately, it was a brilliant summer, or in their houses, and video them doing lots of exercises and routines that simulate exactly what it feels like to do the dives, with the exception of not being able to go into the water, of course, or going from any great height. But they amazed us at how hard they worked, 2, 3 or 4 hours every day doing these dry land skills. So when they were able to get back in the pool, they were already at a higher fitness level. Yeah,
absolutely. That sounds really interesting. How they're really creative to sort of make sure that they sort of keep going into the Olympic year. In terms of training, I mean, just for our listeners, what sort of you gave us a bit of a brief insight into what training's like, but sort of is it okay to elaborate on that, sort of, Kim? What sort of training is like for a diver? Our listeners are probably
most of the best divers, well, even the average divers, do gymnastics, warm-up and gymnastics and acrobatics and ballet before they get into the pool. The top elite ones probably do about an hour and a half of dry land, warming up, stretching. We have a gymnastics coach that was a European champion for Great Britain, and he does an acrobatics program because it's all about speed and flexibility and power and strength. It's like gymnastics only into water. But we need to, as well as creating that strength and speed so that they can do all the most difficult dives in the world and have a higher degree of difficulty, we also have to make them look graceful because obviously, your toe point, the leg line, the last thing the judges see can't be someone that looks like a bent-kneed, flat-footed gymnast. They have to be very graceful, but like a ballerina.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you sort of touched on some of the mental skills that they do, like the visualization. Is that something that's incorporated into the program, Kim, the mental skills training?
Yeah, exactly. We start that off in the junior program. We have at least 1 or 2 sports psychologists, obviously not full-time because they're quite expensive, but they work with the elite athletes, and we've even had them working with the parents, actually, making sure the parents are aware of what we're doing with the athletes, or with their children, and with the athletes working out their mental visualization, whether they're intrinsic or extrinsic, whether they see themselves doing it from afar or whether they see themselves doing it from inside themselves. And sometimes we try out different methods with the kids to see what works best for them.
That's really interesting. Is that something that sort of has always been there, Kim, or is that something you introduced?
No, it's not. It's something that when I was a coach, we didn't have access to that, and the coaches had to be the sports psychologists themselves. But nowadays, we're aware of the fact that obviously you've got to be one of the best divers, but the mental toughness, you can see the best divers break down under pressure. Without that strength, that mental strength, mental toughness, you won't get that medal on the world stage.
Absolutely, and sort of you can see that the mental skills does make obviously it's difficult to quantify how much, but you can sort of see how it does make a difference, for them.
But Jim, I can tell you that I rate that as the highest, and obviously the medical support behind,
of course,
that you stay injury free or recover from injury rehab as a close second. But the mental toughness is key.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of, it might be outside the scope of your remit, Kim, but in terms of anyone sort of interested to get involved in diving, is there a way they can sort of, some of our listeners might be thinking, okay, I'd like to have a look and explore a bit more. Are there ways they can sort of, get in touch? Is there like an association or anything they can do to maybe look into? Yeah, they
can look on the website under Swim England.
Okay.
And that will point them in the right direction. There's lots of Swim England website, just Google it, or even British Swimming, because obviously diving comes under them as one of the disciplines.
Okay.
Or you can just Google to find out where the nearest diving pool is to you. Look on the website for there, and you can probably find it when the diving is. You'll be limited to spectate at the moment because of COVID-19.
Of course.
But when we get back to some form of normality, you can go along and watch. Join in. There's learn to dive classes in every single diving pool for adults as well.
That's very interesting. And so I sort of gather, Kim, there's a pathway for excellence if someone's got potential.
That would be on the website as well. There's an awful lot of documentation that we do when we're not travelling with the athletes or visiting the athletes' training, which includes a pathway document. So you'll find that on the web link.
And do you guys do like talent ID as well? Is it sort of, or are you relying on people sort of coming along, or does sort of, is there the opportunity to sort of go out there and sort of try and find the next divers of next
Initially, after I think it was in the 90s, late 90s, when we first got lottery funding, we had it at various levels. We had performance, we had potential, and we had they call START, World Class Start, which included a financial funding to help support talent identification and, more importantly, talent confirmation. So we did it professionally at first, and all the programs in the country were incorporated in that. They learned how to do it themselves better in their own environment, whether it's in Manchester or London, whatever, so that they know where to target. They're mostly schools, target young kids, bring them into the diving program, and then it's free to, because you've been talent identified. Then you go to certain tests, and if you succeed, you go into a squad. If you don't succeed, you get offered the chance to go into the diving program. So it's a win-win situation. Nobody's kicked out. But we don't have to focus on the talent identification as much, more the confirmation. So most of the good diving programs, and there's probably about, I'm going to say 15 professional diving programs around the country, just in alone, that have their own talent ID program. And they go into schools. It might only be once a year now because they just need to top up the people that they lose.
Of course, yeah, no, definitely. And you mentioned there, like, in terms of people can sort of get involved in diving, of all levels, even if they're like an adult, for example. Is that sort of so? Is it obviously at the point of recording the show, different restrictions with sort of COVID that are easing off, but just in general, Kim, is the opportunity there for someone of any sort of ability to sort of get involved and just do some diving and see?
Yep. Most definitely. Whether you want to be a diver, a fun diver, a master's diver, someone over the age of 16 that just wants to do it for fun, whether you want to help out on the pool side, there's qualifications level 1, 2 and 3 where you can become a diving coach. All that information again is on the Swim England website under diving. Whether you want to be a volunteer, so you can get involved with the club, you can help out, and you could end up volunteering to be at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham next year.
Wow, yeah, that's
yeah. There's hundreds of opportunities, whether you want to do it for fun, as a volunteer or professional.
Brilliant, yeah, that's really informative, Kim, really, really helpful. And I suppose, finally, in terms of sort of moving forward, in terms of where you sort of see things going, I know it's sort of collective and but just in general, what are your thoughts? You've mentioned there the Chinese, obviously, a challenge. In terms of winning medals. But in terms of going forward, where do you sort of see things going from here, Kim, for British diving moving forward?
Well, at the last Olympics in Rio, there was only every gold medal in diving was won by China, apart from Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And at this Olympics so far in Tokyo, every gold medal and many of the silvers have been won by China, except for Great Britain again. Each 4-year cycle we have a challenge because we have to increase our medal targets with UK sport in order to keep the same sort of funding. In 3 years' time, we've already started now the Paris cycle, so the next Olympics in 3 years will be in Paris, and then after that, 4 years later on, will be in Los Angeles. We've already submitted the plans for the strategic plans on how we're going to win medals at those next 2 Olympics. Obviously, we're waiting until Tokyo's finished in a week's time before we start full belt to them. But there's no reason why we've already proved that we're getting medals on the world stage on a regular basis. If the medal table stays as it is at the moment, we're ranked 2nd in the world. So, obviously, we want to continue being top 3 in the world at the next Olympics. And one of our focuses is to try to increase the performance level of our female athletes, because at the moment our success has been with male athletes. So a lot of the strategic plan work for the next Olympic cycles will be focused on that as well, because that's something that UK sport want to see an even field.
Absolutely, it's an incredible achievement that you've sort of mentioned there in terms of where GB is, and it's phenomenal, really. I think I'm sure some of our listeners, like myself, would have probably first come across diving many years ago. That I don't know if you recall Leganis, Kim. That was one of the watching the Olympics, the American, and that's
when he came back and still won gold.
That's right. Yeah, that was the first, and for sure. And that's just always been a sport that sort of fascinated me, that our listeners really, in terms of just to sort of see a diver up there and just think what goes through their mind, prior to
During that period of time, I used to take my team out to Mission Bay in Florida to train alongside Greg Louganis. So
wow.
He was always one of my heroes as I was a young coach.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, really, to think and to think where British diving are now in terms of up there. Like you says, really, it's this incredible achievement. No doubt, the hard work for yourself and the rest of the team, and certainly some of the household names, that are out there. You mentioned earlier, we sort of familiar with them. So, I really want to thank you, Kim, for coming on board the show. It's been a really interesting and informative interview. No doubt our listeners have got a lot from there, and hopefully they sort of Google British swimming or Swim England, or get involved in any way they possibly can, if that's of interest to them. So thanks again for coming on board the show, Kim. It's been really interesting, and we wish you all the best and success in the future.
You're most welcome, Jim. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you.
Brilliant, fantastic. That was Kim White, the performance manager of British diving. We've sort of, no doubt, many of us have enjoyed watching the diving at the Olympics recently, and you know, I'm sure, you know, from a GB point of view, are pleased with the way things have gone in diving and swimming in general. So that was Kim White on the Friday Sports Show, Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing news from the local area and the world with our aim to increase participation and awareness of different sports.